Hey, it's another episode of Before You Buy. As usual, it's me, Jake Baldino, and today we're talking about Agents of Mayhem. I've been playing it all weekend, and what it is, it's an ambitious hybrid spin-off of the Saints Row series, taking place after one of the endings you can get from Gat Out of Hell. Look, if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry, it doesn't really matter. The Mayhem agency here exists sort of like a world police force full of larger-than-life heroes, almost kind of like a sci-fi comic book version of G.I. Joe. And while that sounds cool on paper, Agents of Mayhem is weird. For me, it's like the definition of hit or miss. But let me get into it though. This is an open world game centered around combat and hero switching. You build this quirky, switchable roster of 3 main heroes that are all pretty diverse in like attack and style and stuff, and it's up to you to take on and defeat this evil group called Legion and all of their soldiers and quirky bosses and their leader, Dr. Babylon, who I will say looks really cool. Things take a while to get going. Interestingly enough, the tutorial doesn't do too much, and then the game starts you with the 3 most bland heroes, but once you get a few more heroes and get into the main flow of play, it does some interesting things. Most importantly, the heroes themselves. There's a bunch here, and they all have lots of different play styles. There's Hollywood. He's this former action star who has pretty decent speed and movement capabilities and an assault rifle. He's well-rounded. Then there's Yeti. He's kind of like a reverse Mr. Freeze. He's got a big ice gun that can freeze enemies, and then you can punch and shatter them into a million pieces. There's a dual-wielding hacker girl, an ex-Yakuza boss who intimidates and confuses enemies when you get in close range, and there's a poisonous arrow sharpshooter Indian doctor. Then there's one of my favorites, Daisy, the roller skating machine gunner, and there's quite a few more. Not to mention the pre-order bonus thing, Johnny Gat from Saints Row, who is a personal favorite of mine. But getting a good mix of heroes is fun. They all play really differently enough, and every so often have specific uses that come in handy and work well with swapping of the D-pad quickly. Some abilities actually work in tandem, like softening up an enemy's shield with one character and finishing it off with a higher DPS character on the fly. In big action set-piece moments, Agents of Mayhem can really feel fun, and especially, and importantly, really challenging. The game has upwards of like 13 difficulty levels. It's all pretty much scaling hit points and chaos and stuff, but it's impressive when things get really nasty. But the moment-to-moment actual gameplay that you spend most of the time in itself, not so much. You have an open-world futuristic city of Seoul, South Korea as your playground, but it feels kind of lifeless. Look, I'll give it points for looking pretty cool and having a lot of variation, and it looks definitely interesting, but nothing really dynamic or anything interesting really ever happens in it. Navigation and exploration in the world has been compared to Crackdown, thanks to like the emphasis of jumping and double and triple jumping from rooftop to rooftop, and I do get the Crackdown feel and vibe, but it ends there. I don't understand the appeal of exploration really here. You can find shards that allow you to get slight upgrades for your power, as well as cash, and other small bonuses hidden in chests and stuff, but that's really about it. Little emergent pop-up quests show up, like knocking down a thing, or saving a civilian, or stealing a slow civilian car and bringing it back to base, but they're all very much you've done it once, you've seen it all type of thing. I will say some of the driving stuff, not the side quest stuff, but the main quest stuff, does some interesting things with some driving scenarios. The drift button is really cool. It works very well. Driving is fun, but they don't do too much with it. I wish we could have seen a little more. Taking down 4 base hideouts can be a fun scenario to like own the map like a tower-based open world game, but the villains occasionally take them back, which makes it interesting in theory, but honestly kind of a bit annoying, at least just for me. Interestingly enough, and kind of unfortunate, all other hero characters are locked behind side quests you need to complete to unlock them, which is fine, but these missions more often than not are completely boring. A majority of them are cookie-cutter indoor lab dungeon environments repeated over and over again, even in the main campaign sometimes. Now, while they do feel like a total slog, you at least get some interesting backstory for many of the heroes you play as. Some of their story stuff actually is really good. It's short and to the point, but it's charming. It's just interestingly enough, especially when they're accompanied with the animated cartoon sequences. They look really good, and they're entertaining, and I look forward to playing with them. They actually feel like a nice reward to watch. Now, it's worth saying, humor is completely subjective, and I just want to say that, because the jokes more often than not didn't land for me. You know, there's like mile-a-minute dialogue constantly spewing in the game at you, and I found most of it kind of annoying. But again, that's just me. Some people like the style and charm and goofiness. It doesn't go as far as Saints Row, which I actually did really love, but I just wanted to point out some folks might find some comedy here, and some folks might think it's terrible and cringeworthy. But interesting individual stories don't get the exclusive animated treatment. The main story beats do too. And there are some great action set-piece sequences and shootouts in cool places and some pretty large-scale boss battles, but they just feel too few and far between. The work to get to them and the main day-to-day gameplay manages to feel grindy without the game actually really having too much to grind towards, if that makes sense. Going back to this Arc Homebase thing allows you to look at your completion stats, select different default vehicles and skins for your characters and weapons, as well as participate in a metagame and some online online community stuff where you can send your characters off on timed missions to bring back rewards. If you've seen it in other games, it's pretty much the same here. There's also shops and stuff to spend cash on upgrades, and you can sort of vaguely craft stuff that is basically crafting roles for little perks and buffs that you can slot in and power your character. It gets pretty overwhelming because they throw a lot of them at you and you never really get used to them, but it's good in the sense that there's a lot of player choice for really fine-tuning your individual characters. Which all these little different perks and buffs and abilities that allow intricate little ways for things to work differently, I think is worth noting, and I think is one of the highlights of the game, honestly. If you're a systems person, some of the stuff and some of the stat stuff they have here going is pretty interesting. The progression works well enough, there's just not a lot of it. I found myself getting slightly hooked, though, on trying to max out as many heroes as I could and like hunt down all their skins and stuff. Despite the world feeling pretty empty, like I said, there's still plenty of boxes to check off if you're that type of player. But if you're kind of fatigued of open world games, I think some of you might find the same thing here. The main quest, though, should take you like 13 or 14 hours if you breeze through it, with plenty of side stuff still to do, as well as, like I said, still trying to max out every single character, which is kind of fun. I've been kind of negative, but on the positive side, the game looks great. I absolutely love the look and style of the characters. They're all really well realized. The whole look and feel is almost like if Overwatch was a campaign-based open-world third-person shooter. And to me, I think that's a good compliment to give to the game. The whole game, it's bright and colorful with a good sense of design consistency and a decent city draw distance. There is some pop in here and there, and I did have one disappearing car glitch, but otherwise, I had no performance issues playing on PC. I've seen others report different issues like Total Biscuit, but then again, everyone has a different rig. One glaring omission here is online play. Now, I know this is kind of like a very mainstream consensus thing on the game. I get why they didn't want to do it, and I always commend a completely single-player experience like this is, but the design itself feels clearly catered to online co-op and multiplayer. It almost feels like it was going to be a thing and then taken out halfway through. I can't fault the game for being just single-player because I love just single-player games, and I won't here, but I just want to point that out and how it really feels. Ultimately, Agents of Mayhem is fine. It's not a bad game. I was hoping it will be a little bit better. It just has a bit of an identity crisis to it, but it plays well and it's designed well. It's just not very exciting. But of course, guys, that's just me. I give you some pros, some cons, and some personal opinion thrown in there, but now I definitely want to hear yours down in the comments. If you've hopped into Agents of Mayhem day one, what are you thinking? What's your favorite character? What are your favorite 3 characters to roll with? I want to know. And if you're on the outside looking in, maybe you haven't touched this game or really paid much attention to it, how are you really feeling about it? What are you thinking? Look, if you have any questions, I'll be in the comments as usual as much as I can, but if you have anything else for me, hit me up on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Jake Baldino as usual. You guys know the deal, though. Thank you so much for coming around and watching our Before You Buys. I have such a good time doing these. Clicking the like button helps me out a ton, and we really appreciate it here, but subscribing if you're new is a good idea too, because we put out stuff like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.
That was only the advance guard. There's more of them protecting a warehouse in the back.